Emma Grace lived in a town so small it didn't even have a traffic light. Just one dusty main street, two diners, a church, and a corner flower shop that smelled like fresh rain and forgotten dreams. At 18, Emma didn't know luxury or popularity, but she knew how to make dying roses bloom again. She knew how to smile through pain and how to whisper hope into her mother's tired ears. Every morning at 6 a.m., she woke up in their creaky little home at the edge of town. The roof leaked when it rained, the heater groaned in the winter, and the front door squeaked like it cried every time it opened. Emma didn't mind. She tiptoed through the house, careful not to wake her mother, who slept beneath a worn quilt and the quiet hum of an oxygen machine. She prepared toast and weak tea, set her mother's medicine on the bedside table, and brushed her own tangled hair in front of a cracked mirror. She had one good dress. She washed it every Sunday. She wore it like armor. The townspeople talked about Emma, but never to her. She's too quiet, too strange, too pretty for someone with nothing. She was used to whispers, whispers at church, at the market, and in the flower shop where she worked 6 days a week. She had learned to live between them, like breathing between waves. No one knew her heart. No one knew that sometimes, after her shift, Emma sat by the river alone, that she'd watch the sky until it turned dark and dream about a life bigger than this one, a life where she wasn't just surviving, but living, a life where someone saw her, truly saw her. She had never dated, never been kissed, never even held a boy's hand. Not because she wasn't wanted, but because she couldn't afford distractions. Her mother came first, always. Sometimes, late at night, she would write letters she never sent, to a man she had never met. She didn't know his name, his face, or if he even existed. But in those letters, she poured her heart. "Dear stranger," she wrote one night, "I don't want diamonds or dresses. I just want someone to listen when I speak and to look at me like I matter." She folded the letter and hid it beneath the floorboard under her bed. The flower shop became her second home. It was run by old Mrs. Hawthorne, who smelled like peppermint and lavender, and paid Emma just enough to buy groceries and keep the lights on. Emma worked with grace, her hands gentle, her eyes kind. Customers came for flowers, but stayed because Emma made them feel seen. She arranged each bouquet like it was for someone she loved, even if it was just for a stranger's wedding or a funeral she wasn't invited to. She tied ribbons with care. She whispered soft words to wilted petals. She never rushed beauty. "Your heart's too big for this town," Mrs. Hawthorne told her once, handing her a warm cookie. Emma smiled softly. "I just want to make things bloom." But inside, a loneliness grew like ivy, quiet, steady, and reaching. She hid it well. No one knew that every night she cried into her pillow, aching for a voice that would call her beautiful, not because of her looks, but because of her soul. She believed in love, but not the kind from movies. She believed in the kind that waited, the kind that didn't need perfect clothes or money or grand gestures. Just truth and patience. Her world was small, but her heart was not. Every time the town girls passed her in their bright dresses, whispering about college, boyfriends, and parties, Emma just lowered her eyes and kept walking. She wasn't jealous. Not really. She just wished someone would choose her, not because she was loud or wild, but because she was real. One cloudy morning, she stood outside the flower shop, arranging pink lilies in the display window. The breeze lifted her hair. Her eyes sparkled beneath the overcast sky. And in that moment, a car rolled by slowly, a sleek black one she didn't recognize. Inside, a man sat watching her, a man who had never known a woman like Emma, a man whose world was cold, vast, and silent. And yet, as he saw her, something cracked inside him, just for a second. Emma didn't see him. She was too busy adjusting a rose petal that had bent in the wind, too busy trying to make everything perfect for someone else. But the man in the car, he didn't forget her. He didn't know her name or her story, but something told him. She was different. Emma had no idea her life was about to change. No clue that the world she dreamed about was racing toward her, in a car with tinted windows and a broken heart behind the wheel. No idea that someone, somewhere, had just found his reason to hope again, and all she did was smile at a flower. Alexander Blackwell lived in a world most people couldn't imagine, a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and long hallways that echoed with silence. He owned private jets, vintage cars, and 10 homes across the country, but none of them felt like home. At just 29, he was already a billionaire. He had inherited his fortune the moment his cold, steel-hearted father retired and handed him the empire. The Blackwell name carried weight, too much of it. Everyone either feared him or wanted something from him. No one loved him. His mother died when he was 9. Cancer. She had been the only soft voice in a house filled with money and rules. When she passed, so did the warmth in Alexander's world. His father, Robert Blackwell, raised him like a soldier, not a son. No emotions, no weaknesses, especially not with women, he would say. Trust no one. They will smile at you and steal from you in the same breath. So Alexander listened. He built walls so high around his heart, even he forgot what lived inside. He went to the best schools, graduated with honors, became CEO at 25. He made decisions worth millions in seconds, but he couldn't remember the last time someone asked how he felt. He never dated, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't dare. Women scared him, not their beauty, but their intentions. He'd seen too many fake smiles. He could hear a lie before the lips even parted, so he stayed alone. He built companies instead of relationships, meetings, mergers, contracts, deadlines. Those were safe, predictable. He had assistants, not friends, chefs, not dinner companions, security guards, not brothers. The only person who stayed longer than a year was Bernard, his butler, who had known him since birth and knew better than to ask personal questions. His mansion was a fortress, white stone, massive gates, glass walls that showed off a view but revealed nothing of the man inside. It stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the ocean, like a king too proud to step down to shore. And Alexander? He ruled his empire from behind a desk, staring out windows, making numbers grow, watching the world from a distance. But inside he was lonely in a way money could never touch. He would lie in his silk-sheeted bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe his father was wrong. Maybe love wasn't a weakness. Maybe silence wasn't safety. It was a slow death. Sometimes he'd imagine a woman, not one in designer heels or red lips, but one with kind eyes, one who didn't flinch at his silence or try to impress him with lies, one who just was, honest, soft, and real. He didn't know where she lived or if she even existed, but he dreamed of her anyway. Then one autumn afternoon, Alexander did something unusual. He left the mansion. No security, no assistant, no schedule. He drove his own car, an old one he rarely used. He wanted to escape, just for a while. No cameras, no voices, just him and the road. He ended up in a town so small it didn't even look like it had a name. The kind of place where people sat on porches and kids rode rusty bikes. The kind of place his father would have scoffed at. But something about it felt different, peaceful. As he turned a corner, his car made a strange noise. Smoke hissed from the hood. Great, he muttered, pulling over. He stepped out and looked around. That's when he saw her. Across the street stood a small flower shop, its windows lined with pink and white blooms. And standing outside, adjusting a vase of lilies, was a girl. Not flashy, not loud, just graceful, like she belonged to the earth and sky at the same time. Her hair was tied in a loose braid, her dress simple. Her hands were covered in soil, but her face, it glowed. Alexander froze. He couldn't explain it, couldn't name what twisted in his chest. But for the first time in years, he forgot about business. He forgot about power. All he saw was her. She didn't look up, didn't notice him, didn't try to. That made him want to know her even more. He didn't speak to her that day. He drove back home in silence, heart thudding like it never had before. But something had shifted inside him. The walls he built for years. A crack had appeared. And through that crack, sunlight entered, soft, warm, and named Emma. It was supposed to be just another night, another suit, another champagne glass, Another crowd of investors, shaking hands like wolves, smiling through their teeth. But Alexander couldn't breathe. The noise, the shallow laughter, the fake compliments. It was suffocating. He slipped out quietly, leaving behind the glowing ballroom of his father's company gala. No driver, no guard. He wanted air. He wanted silence. He wanted to feel human. He drove aimlessly. The highway stretched like a ribbon of escape beneath him. The stars overhead were brighter than the lights in any boardroom. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about profit margins. He was just driving. Then came the smoke. The old car, unused and untested, coughed and wheezed like it was dying. Steam billowed from under the hood. The engine groaned. With a quiet curse, Alexander pulled over. It was a small town. He had no idea where. But he got out alone and looked around. And that's when he saw her. Across the street stood a flower shop bathed in golden light. Not fancy, just warm. And outside, in the soft breeze of the late afternoon, stood the girl. Her hair was tied up in a messy knot, strands dancing around her cheeks. Her hands were dirty with soil, but her smile lit up the gray sky. She was arranging lilies in the display window, her fingers moving gently, like the flowers were living things she didn't want to disturb. She hummed something he couldn't quite hear. Alexander didn't move. He stood frozen, his feet rooted to the ground like the world had narrowed down to one moment. One girl. She didn't see him, didn't look up. She had no idea that the richest man in the state was standing across the road, staring like a man who had just seen color for the first time. He didn't go in. Not that day. He was too afraid. Not of her, but of what he felt. He drove back that night with a heart he didn't recognize. It beat too fast. It hoped too much. The next morning he made a call. To Bernard, his lifelong butler and the only man he trusted. Go to a flower shop in Willow Creek, he said. Buy something, anything. Bernard didn't ask questions. He returned later that day with a bouquet of lilies wrapped in twine. Alexander held the flowers like they were sacred. He inhaled their scent like a man remembering something he never had. The next day he sent Bernard again. Different flowers. Same shop. Was the girl there? Alexander asked casually, pretending not to care. Yes, sir. She's quite kind. The third day, Alexander couldn't take it anymore. He drove back himself. He parked 2 blocks away, his heart thudding like a boy going to his first dance. He took a deep breath and walked through the door. The bell chimed softly above him. The shop smelled like heaven, lavender, earth, and sweetness. She was at the counter. She looked up, her eyes wide and clear, like ponds untouched by storms. Hi, he said, his voice lower than he meant. These lilies are beautiful. She smiled, and something inside him broke and healed all at once. Thank you, she replied. They're my favorite. He stared, not at her beauty, though she had plenty, but at the peace in her presence. She wasn't trying to impress him. She didn't know who he was. She wasn't pretending. That made her more rare than all the diamonds he'd ever owned. Would you like me to wrap them? She asked. Please, he said. And maybe I'll get some tomorrow too. She tilted her head. Are they for someone special? He paused, and then, with a small smile, said, Maybe. She blushed. Just a little. The next day he came again. Then again. Then again. Every time he bought flowers he didn't need. Tulips, daisies, sunflowers. He lined his cold mansion with colors and scents, each one tied to a memory of her voice, her laughter, her hands brushing petals. Their conversations were short at first. Awkward. He didn't know how to be charming. She didn't know how to flirt. But that's what made it real. He asked about lilies. She told him how they symbolized rebirth. He asked about roses. She whispered how they were delicate, but full of strength. He watched the way she smiled at flowers like they were old friends. She watched the way he listened like her words mattered. She had no idea he was Alexander Blackwell, the man in Forbes, the billionaire recluse, the tycoon with a stone reputation. To her, he was just Alexander. And he loved that. For the first time in his life, someone saw him without the weight of his name. He didn't need power to earn her attention. He just needed honesty. One afternoon, as she handed him a sunflower, their fingers touched. He didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Their eyes met. And in that moment, without saying it aloud, both of them knew this wasn't just chance. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. 3 months passed, like pages in a book neither of them wanted to end. Alexander came every day. Rain or shine, he walked through the door of the flower shop with a quiet smile and eyes that searched for her face. Emma's hands, once always busy with soil and stems, now often paused to fix her braid when she saw him coming. She didn't understand it, not fully, but her heart beat faster when he was near. Their talks grew longer. He shared stories about the sky. She shared dreams about the sea. Neither talked about the world outside, just the quiet, sacred space between them. He never told her who he was. Not yet. Not because he was hiding, but because he was afraid. Afraid that the moment she knew the truth, she'd stop seeing him and start seeing the billionaire. He couldn't risk that. And Emma, she didn't pry. She knew he wasn't from there. His clothes, his voice, his manners said so. But she didn't care. What mattered was how gently he spoke to her, how deeply he listened, how he never treated her like she was small. She didn't know the world he came from, and he had never known the kind of woman she was. Then came the day that changed everything. The sky was painted in orange and gold, and the air smelled like rain. Emma was closing the shop when she heard the bell chime one last time. She turned, and there he stood. Not in his usual quiet way. He looked nervous, his hands clenched, his breath uneven. "Emma," he began, his voice thick, "I know this sounds crazy, but will you marry me?" Her hands stopped. Her breath caught. She blinked as if the words were a dream she wasn't ready for. She laughed, softly, nervously. "You don't even know me." His voice shook. "I do. Maybe not every detail, but I know your heart, and I've never met a woman like you. You don't want anything from me. You never ask me for favors or things or attention. You just smile and care and listen. That's rare, and it's real." She wanted to run, not away from him, but away from fear, because it was scary to be loved like that, like she was something more than just a girl in a small town. Her head told her no. Too fast, too wild, too big. But her heart whispered something softer, something that drowned out fear. "Say yes." So she did. Her voice trembled, but her words were sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. And in that little flower shop, with petals scattered on the counter and dust dancing in the sunset light, two souls found home in each other. But love doesn't always stay quiet. Within days, the town knew. It spread like spilled perfume on old paper. Emma from the flower shop was marrying a man with money, a stranger, a mystery, a secret. The whispers began. She's doing it for the money. He's using her for something. No girl like her ends up with a man like that without a reason. Did you hear she didn't even know who he was? And then came worse. People Emma thought were kind began to pull away. Some of the older ladies didn't come to the shop anymore. Others gave her tight smiles and colder hearts. Some made comments meant to wound but wrapped in politeness. She'll never fit in his world. He'll toss her out once he's done playing poor. She's not the kind of girl that ends up in a mansion. Even those with smiling faces had cruel voices behind closed doors. They questioned her background, her family, even her skin, her simplicity, whispers laced with old, bitter roots of racism and classism. Emma heard them all, and every word stung like a thorn buried deep. She cried at night, holding her mother's hand, wondering if she'd made a mistake, if love was enough, if kindness could win. Alexander noticed her silence, her sudden distance. "Are you okay?" he asked one evening, sitting beside her outside the shop under fading stars. She didn't lie. "They're talking. The town. They think I'm after your money, that you're using me, that I don't belong in your world." His eyes darkened, not with anger toward her, but toward the world that had hurt her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted this for you." But she shook her head. "I'm not leaving. I chose you, not their voices." He took her hand and kissed it. Then let me show you the truth. The next day he brought her to the mansion. The iron gates opened, the white walls rose like a castle, and as she stepped in, she didn't see wealth. She saw emptiness, cold halls, quiet rooms. A man who had everything, and no one. And now, he had her. She didn't blink at the luxury, didn't gasp at the chandeliers. She just turned and looked at him with a smile that said, "I'm still here." Love wasn't built on riches, it was built on trust. And theirs was stronger than gossip, louder than whispers. So Emma held her chin higher. She walked through town, hand in hand with Alexander. Not to prove anything, but because love doesn't need permission to be proud. And in every stare, in every doubt-filled eye, they stood like a flame that refused to be snuffed out. The day Emma stepped into Alexander's mansion, she felt like Alice falling into a world too big, too quiet, and too cold. The gates had opened for her, but the warmth had not. The mansion was a masterpiece of architecture, marble floors that echoed with each step, chandeliers that sparkled like stars, and hallways that seemed to stretch into eternity. Yet despite its grandeur, it felt devoid of life. The staff moved like shadows, silent and efficient, their eyes avoiding hers. No smiles, no greetings, just a mechanical routine that made Emma feel like an intruder in her own home. Alexander noticed her unease. "They're just not used to change," he said, attempting a reassuring smile. She nodded, but the emptiness lingered. Days turned into weeks, and the silence of the mansion became deafening. Emma tried to fill it with music, laughter, and the scent of fresh flowers, but the walls seemed to absorb joy and reflect back solitude. One afternoon, a black car pulled into the driveway. From it emerged a man with a stern face and cold eyes, Alexander's father. He greeted his son with a nod and turned to Emma with a scrutinizing gaze. "So, you're the girl," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're not the kind of woman our family welcomes." Emma felt the sting of his words, but she stood tall. "I'm not here to be welcomed. I'm here because I love your son." He scoffed and walked past her, leaving a trail of bitterness. That night, Emma sat alone in the vast bedroom, tears streaming down her face. Doubts crept in. Had she made a mistake? Was love enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds? Alexander found her there, curled up on the bed, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," he whispered, sitting beside her. "I've lived in fear my whole life. I don't know how to be a husband, but I want to try. For you." Emma looked into his eyes and saw the vulnerability he rarely showed. She reached out and hugged him, holding the broken pieces of his heart together. From that moment, they decided to build their own world within the mansion, a world filled with laughter, music, and trust. They started small. Emma introduced weekly dinners where they cooked together, turning the sterile kitchen into a place of warmth and aroma. They danced in the grand ballroom, their laughter echoing through the halls. Alexander began to open up, sharing stories of his childhood, his fears, and his dreams. Emma listened, offering comfort and understanding. Slowly, the staff began to change. They smiled, engaged in conversations, and even joined in the couple's activities. The mansion transformed from a cold fortress into a home. Emma's presence brought life to the once silent walls. Her kindness melted the ice that had encased Alexander's heart for years. Together, they faced challenges, confronted prejudices, and proved that love could indeed conquer all. The night air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, and the mansion stood serene under the moonlight. Emma and Alexander had just finished a quiet dinner, their laughter still echoing softly through the grand halls. The warmth between them was palpable, a testament to the love they had nurtured amidst adversity. Suddenly, a faint crackling sound disrupted the tranquility. Emma's brow furrowed. "Do you hear that?" she asked, rising from her seat. Alexander listened intently. The crackling grew louder, accompanied by the unmistakable scent of smoke. Panic surged through him. "Stay here," he instructed, rushing towards the source of the noise. But Emma, ever courageous, followed him. As they reached the staircase, thick smoke billowed from the lower levels, and flames licked the edges of the grand foyer. The fire had started in the electrical room, a result of faulty wiring that had gone unnoticed. "Emma, we need to get out!" Alexander shouted, grabbing her hand. But as they turned to retreat, a beam collapsed behind them, blocking their path. The fire roared, consuming everything in its path. Emma coughed violently, her eyes stinging. "We can't go back that way," she cried. Alexander scanned their surroundings. "The servants' staircase," he recalled. "It's our only chance." Navigating through the smoke-filled corridors, they reached the narrow staircase. But as they descended, another explosion rocked the mansion, causing debris to fall and block their escape. Trapped, Emma's strength waned. She collapsed, gasping for air. Alexander knelt beside her, cradling her in his arms. "I won't leave you," he whispered, tears streaming down his soot-covered face. "I'd rather die with you than live without you." Summoning every ounce of strength, Alexander hoisted Emma onto his back and searched for another escape route. He remembered a service elevator that led directly outside. Battling the flames and smoke, he reached the elevator shaft, pried open the doors, and carefully lowered them down using the emergency ladder. Outside, the night was ablaze with flashing lights and chaos. Firefighters rushed towards them, assisting as they emerged from the inferno. Emma was immediately taken to an ambulance, while Alexander, suffering from severe burns and smoke inhalation, was rushed to the hospital. The mansion, their home, was reduced to ashes. In the hospital, Emma never left Alexander's side. She held his hand through every procedure, whispered words of love during his unconscious moments, and prayed fervently for his recovery. News of their ordeal spread rapidly. Media outlets picked up the story of the young woman who stood by her husband's side and the millionaire who risked everything for love. Their tale touched hearts across the nation. People who once judged their union now sent letters of support. Social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating their love. Donations poured in to help them rebuild. Their story became a beacon of hope, illustrating that love transcends societal boundaries, prejudices, and even the flames of adversity. The sun was rising the day Alexander Blackwell left the hospital. He stood in the hospital courtyard, frail but alive, his hand tightly clasped in Emma's. The fire had taken his home, scorched his skin, and left scars that would never fully fade. But it had also burned away something else, his fear. The world outside was waiting. A podium had been set up outside the hospital entrance. Reporters crowded the space. Cameras clicked. Live streams rolled. It wasn't just a press conference, it was a moment the world had waited for. Alexander took a breath, steadying himself. He wasn't a man of public emotion. He had once hidden behind walls, concrete, financial, and emotional. But today he stood with his heart wide open. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice hoarse but strong. "I was raised to believe that love was dangerous," he began, looking out into a sea of expectant faces. "That people only cared about your money, that women couldn't be trusted, that people from different classes, different worlds, couldn't possibly understand each other." The crowd held its breath. "My father taught me that kindness is weakness, that love is a transaction, that the world divides us, and that's just the way it is." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her. Emma. She stood a few feet away, her eyes glistening with tears. "But then, I met her." His voice cracked. "She came from a small town. She had nothing, no wealth, no status, no connections. But what she did have was everything that I never knew I needed." He stepped away from the microphone for a moment and took her hand. He didn't care about protocol. The world could wait. "She gave me laughter when I didn't know how to smile. She gave me hope when all I knew was fear. She gave me her heart, without asking for anything in return." The crowd was silent. "She didn't save me from the fire, Yurskode," he said, voice trembling. "She saved me long before that." A reporter wiped tears from her eyes. One cameraman stopped filming just to listen. Across the world, millions watched the live stream. On TVs, on phones, on office computers. Some watched in silence. Others cried openly. Alexander turned back to the microphone, his voice rising with strength. "Our story isn't about a millionaire and a flower shop girl. It's about breaking walls. It's about realizing that class, race, money, None of it means anything if your heart isn't open. She taught me that love doesn't ask what you have. It asks who you are. He looked straight into the camera. So if you were raised to fear someone different, if you were taught to judge someone because of their skin or their salary or their zip code, look at us. Look at what love built. The crowd erupted in applause. The video was shared over 100 million times in 2 weeks. News anchors choked up describing their journey. Talk shows discussed how their love challenged classism and racist views. Even skeptics couldn't deny the power of what they had survived together. Hateful comments still existed, but they were drowned out by the flood of love, empathy, and newfound awareness. Emma and Alexander moved into a new home, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a place filled with warmth and laughter. They started a foundation together to help young couples from different backgrounds facing discrimination. They gave scholarships, built community gardens. They planted love where there had once been only division. And when people asked them how they made it through the fire, the pain, the judgment, Emma would smile and say, "We didn't fall in love with what the world saw. We fell in love with what the world needed to see." Their story lived on, not just as a fairy tale, but as a challenge to a broken world. Love had no class, no color, no walls, and no limits.